We're all glued to those headlines, right? The war in Ukraine. But today, we're going to go deeper. Beyond the breaking news, we're asking, can Russia keep this up? Can they actually sustain this war effort? We're using data points, we got graphs, expert reports, we're diving deep into the losses Russia's facing. And not just, the human tragedy, which is horrible, but what does this mean strategically?
Yeah.
Could this be a turning point? Will all these losses force Russia to change how they're fighting this thing?
It's really interesting to see this idea of attrition warfare playing out in real time. It's not just about winning this battle or that battle, but about just grinding down the enemy. Can they even wage war at all after a while?
And the numbers are, well, they're grim. Some reports say over 2,000 Russian tanks just gone, destroyed. That's a ton of firepower just wiped out. And then there are the casualties. We're talking tens of thousands.
Yeah. To put that in perspective, that's more than any conflict Russia's been in recently anyway. It makes you wonder, can they keep fighting like this? Russia's whole military thing, their doctrine's built around having a huge force. But the data, it's showing us something else.
What's that?
They can't replace their equipment and people fast enough. Look at the equipment losses. Some estimates say they're behind production by almost 20%.
Huh. So can't they just, make more tanks, call up more soldiers, keep going?
It's not that simple. There are these big, I guess you could call them roadblocks to Russia keeping this up. One of the biggest, just making stuff, production.
Yeah.
They have a big defense industry, sure. But even if those factories are working all out 24/7, there's still this lag. Building a tank, training the crew, getting it where it needs to go, it takes time. And what we're seeing is they just can't build things as fast as they're losing them out there.
So it's like this constant scramble to replace stuff as they're losing more and more. And then there's the people. The equipment losses, they're huge, but it's the human cost that really gets to me. What are the sources saying about that?
Well, the number of casualties, it's just awful, obviously. But we got to think about the long-term effects too, on morale, recruitment.
Yeah.
Even public opinion back in Russia.
Yeah.
They try to control information, but word gets out. People know guys are dying. Things are tough.
Right.
That affects everything. Will young guys sign up? Will people support the war? It's like this ripple effect. Starts on the battlefield and spreads throughout their whole society.
Okay, so we've got the production problem, the human cost.
Yeah.
What's the third thing making it hard for Russia to sustain this war?
Money. War is really, really expensive. And the sanctions from the West, they're squeezing Russia's economy.
Yeah.
Sanctions have, wiped out maybe 10% of their whole GDP, and almost a third of their budget is going to the military now. That's a ton of pressure. It forced them to make some tough choices, cut military spending, bring troops home, or maybe they change their strategy.
A shift in strategy. Now that's something I want to dig into.
Yeah, so with all these roadblocks, Russia has to start thinking differently. How do we fight this war? It's kind of interesting, actually. When you don't have a lot of resources, you got to get creative. Russia might have to get, way more efficient, squeeze every last bit of use out of their equipment, their soldiers, even their bullets.
So instead of those huge attacks we saw early on, are we going to see smaller, more focused stuff? Hitting specific targets.
Exactly. Think of it like surgical strikes. Take out key infrastructure, mess up their supply lines, maybe more cyber warfare, try to manipulate information.
Sound like a chess match almost. Every move is more calculated. You're trying to outsmart the other guy, not just overpower him with brute force.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Both sides would have to learn new skills, new tactics. Russia would have to be more nimble, more flexible in how they operate.
And what about Ukraine? How would they have to adapt?
Well, they'd have to anticipate these changes, right? And come up with ways to counter them. If Russia starts targeting supply lines, Ukraine's got to make theirs stronger. Maybe even create supply chains that are harder to hit, more decentralized.
So are we talking guerrilla warfare almost?
Kinda, yeah. They need to stay mobile, be able to adapt quickly, be able to operate in an environment that's always changing, always unpredictable.
That sounds like a huge challenge for both sides. But even with all they've been through, the losses, the hardships, it seems like Ukraine has a big advantage here.
Oh. What makes you say that?
Well, everything we've talked about, they seem incredibly motivated, this deep will to fight for their country, and they have the international community backing them up.
You're hitting on something important there. That combination, the determination and the outside support, it's powerful. It's it multiplies their strength.
Yeah.
And Russia, with their internal problems, their economy shrinking, they might not be able to match that.
It's like, a David and Goliath story almost. Smaller, more agile force, fighting for a cause, up against this giant that can't adapt as easily.
It's a good story, and it resonates with people. But we got to remember, this war isn't over, and we don't know how it's going to end. There are so many factors on the battlefield, but also in global politics.
Right. Wars are rarely predictable. But looking at the data, the trends, it feels like Russia's at a crossroads.
Yeah. The choices they make in the next few months, they're going to have huge consequences. Will they stick with their current strategy? Or will they realize the need to adapt? That's going to determine a lot about how this conflict plays out.
And we can't forget the Ukrainian people. Their resilience, their will to defend their home, it's inspiring.
Absolutely. And their fate, to a large degree, depends on whether the world keeps supporting them. The aid, the resources, the solidarity. All of it is vital for them to keep resisting.
That means that all of us, even if we're far away from the fighting, we have a role to play. Spreading awareness, donating to help people, even just talking about what's happening and trying to understand it. It all matters.
I couldn't agree more. This war shows us that we're all connected, you know? What one person or country does, it affects everyone else.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think what we've learned is this. Russia's war machine, it's hitting some serious snags. Snags that might force them to change course. And whether Ukraine can capitalize on that, it really depends on the world sticking with them.
It's complex, it's always changing. But it demands our attention, our careful analysis, and most importantly, action.
You know, it's easy to get lost in the numbers, the strategies, all that, but we got to remember the people at the heart of this.
Right. Every statistic, every line on a graph, that represents a real person whose life has been turned upside down.
Families ripped apart, homes destroyed, dreams shattered. This war, it affects so much more than just the battlefield.
And those effects, they can last for generations. The trauma, the displacement, the economic struggles, those are wounds that take a long, long time to heal.
Which is why groups like Ukraine Boost are so important. They're working so hard to get people the help they need, to rebuild communities, to help people put their lives back together.
Yeah, they're a real beacon of hope in all this darkness. They show the strength of the human spirit.
For anyone listening who's maybe feeling overwhelmed by all this, who's wondering what they can do to help, supporting an organization like Ukraine Boost, that's a real tangible way to make a difference.
Even small things can have a big impact. Every dollar, every hour you volunteer, every time you speak up, it all adds up.
So as we finish this deep dive into whether Russia can keep up this war, I think the big takeaway is this. The data, the trends, they paint a really complex picture, one that's always shifting. But at the center of it all are people.
The choices we make.
Yeah.
The incredible strength of the Ukrainians. The support of the world. All of that will decide how this war ends and what its impact will be on the world.
And as we go forward, it's vital that we stay informed, stay involved, and keep looking for ways to help those affected by this war. Because peace, real peace, it's not just about stopping the fighting. It's about justice, compassion, and working together to build a better future for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've looked at the data, talked about strategy, but there's a big question we haven't answered. How do we break this cycle of violence? How do we create a lasting peace in the region? That's the challenge and the opportunity in front of us.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and that it got you thinking. We urge you to stay engaged, stay informed, and keep being a force for good in the world.
It's crazy, right? This whole conflict, it's made so many people aware of military strategy, like we've talked about attrition warfare and all that.
Right.
But I think for a lot of folks, seeing these huge losses, it really hits home just how brutal modern war is, how much it takes to fight one. Yeah, no kidding. It's definitely not like those quick, high-tech wars everyone thought we'd be fighting in the 21st century.
Right.
This war shows that stuff like logistics, keeping those supplies flowing, having enough factories churning out weapons, and just the sheer willpower of the people involved, that's all still crucial.
One thing I found fascinating is how Ukraine's been able to use its partners around the world to kind of balance out Russia's advantages. I mean, Russia's got way more troops, spends way more on their military, but Ukraine's been getting so much help, military aid, intelligence, economic support, mostly from Western countries, and that's been huge for them. It's let them put up a serious fight, even pushback in some places.
Oh, absolutely. That flow of support from the West has been essential for Ukraine to hold on, to launch those counteroffensives we've seen.
It really shows you the power of teamwork, of countries coming together to help each other out.
For sure. But it also makes you wonder, how long can that support last?
Mm.
Giving all this aid to Ukraine, it costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
And as this war drags on, there might be pressure on those Western governments to, maybe scale back their commitments a bit.
that's a scary thought. So, what would happen if that support dried up? Could Ukraine still hold out against Russia?
Tough to say for sure. But I think it's obvious that the help they're getting from the West is a big reason why they've been able to resist this long. If that aid got cut back a lot,
Yeah.
it would put a ton of pressure on Ukraine's military, and it might tip the scales in Russia's favor.
Which brings us back to that big question we started with. Can Russia actually keep this war going? Even with their economy hurting, losing so much equipment and so many soldiers, they've still got a massive military. And it seems like they're determined to get what they want in Ukraine, no matter what.
Yeah, that's true. We got to be honest about that. Even with all the problems we've talked about, Russia could still cause a lot more destruction. They could drag this war out for a long time.
So where does that leave us? What are the big things we should remember from this deep dive, especially for those of us who are worried about this conflict and trying to make sense of it all?
I think the most important thing is this. This war is far from over. We don't know how it's going to end. Both sides have a lot of power, a lot of will to fight. Trying to predict what's going to happen next, that's almost impossible.
But looking at the data, the way things are shifting, the human stories behind it all, I think we've learned a lot.
Absolutely. Hopefully this deep dive has given everyone listening a better sense of what's driving this war, what challenges both sides are facing, and what it all means for the future, not just for that region, but for the whole world.
And like we've been saying, even if we're thousands of miles away, we can still have an impact. Staying informed, having those tough conversations, supporting groups that are helping people on the ground, it all makes a difference.
Couldn't agree more. This war shows us that peace, it's not something that just happens on its own.
Yeah.
We got to work for it. We got to be committed to it. And we got to stand with those who are suffering.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the war in Ukraine. We hope this has been helpful, and we encourage you to keep learning about this, keep talking about it, and keep thinking about how we can all build a better, more peaceful world.